It's Dan Kenner with another episode of The Casual Author. Today is Tuesday, April 11th, 2023, as I record this, and this is episode number 72 of the podcast. Today we're talking to H.L. Walsh about writing with dyslexia and dysgraphia. There's a really enlightening conversation for those of us who do not have dyslexia. It's really interesting to hear his insight about how he's learned to cope with it. We actually just recently learned that our 5-year-old is dyslexic, and it is an interesting journey to figure out. He's very young, he can't read yet, so he can't really, there's a lot of coping things that he can't do since he's so young. But it was really great to hear from H about his perspective on dyslexia and how he's not letting it get to him. So it's a really great conversation. I think that you're going to like that. So as far as the homestead news goes, it's a pretty great week so far. This last Saturday, we just started training the goats in preparation for milking them when they have their kids this and next month, which is, it's always a fun experience. I say fun loosely. It's not actually fun, but it's necessary. The thing about goats is they're friendly for the most part. A couple of our goats are really skittish because they've never had babies before. They were dam raised, meaning they nursed from their mom. We didn't bottle feed them. So they're not scared of us per se. They're just really skittish. Well, the problem with that is we need to train them to come out of their pen into the barn and climb up on the milking stanchion so that we can milk them. It takes a while to train them. So we're starting now. What that means is we get them out. Right now, it's a little bit of a dragging situation. Most of them will come kind of nicely. One of them we have to drag, and I feel a little bit bad, but she's getting used to it. Anyway, we drag them out. We give them a treat to entice them to know that, hey, this is a good thing. It's goat grain covered in molasses. It's got like a blend of various grains that are good for them, help them maintain their body weight when they start producing milk for their babies and for us. So we're training them, and it's been interesting. We also copper bolused them. So something you've probably never heard of, but copper is an essential nutrient for goats. And if they get deficient on it, a number of things can happen. It can harm their reproductive health, make it so that they don't get pregnant or they don't birth their babies well. Their coat just doesn't look as shiny. It's not as healthy. And their tail actually splits. So I made a video about this. It's going to be on YouTube this week, possibly next week. I haven't decided when I'm going to be putting that on there, but I talk a little bit about the copper bolusing process and show you what it entails. It's interesting. Essentially, goats, they don't eat anything you give them, contrary to popular belief that goats will eat anything. But they're little bolus pills, that's what they're called. And inside of these clear casings, there's these little tiny rods of copper. So the rods are important because if they swallow them, it breaks up, and then the rods embed in their stomach lining, and then the copper can get pulled into their system. If it goes through them too fast, then they don't get the copper they need. That's why they're in little rod form. Unfortunately, what it kind of entails is you do have to shove it down their throats a little bit. It doesn't hurt them. It's not even that uncomfortable. You just have to get it past back where they have one row of teeth and then like a hard palate on top of their mouth, and they crunch things. That's how they chew things. So you can't let them do that. It needs to go down and then break in their stomach so that the rods can embed. Unfortunately, our goats aren't accustomed to that because we've never really done it before. When we've last copper bolused them, we gave them goat grain, which they don't chew very well. They inhale it because it tastes so good. So you can pour the little rods on some grain, and then they eat it so fast that they're just swallowing it whole. They're not chewing it. But the grain we have they're really picky, and it's a little bit old. It's not stale too bad, at least we don't think so, but they're picky and they wouldn't eat it. So we had to do the pill shoving this time, and it was not a great experience. Let's just say that only 2 of our goats kind of behaved, the ones that are pre-trained to come out to get milk. The other 3, not so much. It was a battle of wills and strength. Fortunately, I'm stronger than them. We're all friends now. They're not mad at us anymore, but man, at the time, it was very dramatic. Other than that, things are just moving along. The great melt has come. Everything is melted almost entirely. We're getting 60-degree Fahrenheit weather right now, and it's incredible. It feels amazing to go outside. The winter was drawing out so long, I was starting to go crazy. So it's great to have that warmer weather now. That also means that the kittens are starting to venture out. They were born in really cold part of the winter inside our barn. They're fine. They're totally warm and happy, but now they are venturing out. Well, just yesterday when I was out getting the eggs, I heard a kitten yelling pretty loudly, and it sounded like one. So I went out to check on her, and she's very curious. She's always been very curious. She had climbed up the chicken tractor and wedged her way into it and fallen down into the chicken tractor and couldn't get out. And she was panicking. I don't know how long she was in there. She didn't sound dehydrated or anything. She still seemed healthy. She was just scared, obviously, because she was alone. Unfortunately, in that time, Mama Cat decided to relocate the rest of the baby. So when I went into the barn, saw her stuck, and got her out, the other cats were nowhere to be found. And so I was a little worried because it's somewhere soon in there, when our cats, Wilma's had babies before, when they get to 7 to 9 weeks, Wilma takes them out somewhere for 3 or 4 days, up to a week, and we don't see them. She takes them out and teaches them how to hunt, and then she leaves them. It happens every time. It's happened 2 times now, and they inevitably come back. So I was afraid that Wilma had done this, that she had taken the other 5 cats out and disappeared with them, and I wouldn't see Wilma, the mom, for a few days. And I was stuck with this little kitten who was very attached to me, obviously, because I had just gotten her, I saved her from this situation. So every time I tried to put her down, she was just following me everywhere I went. I could not get her off my heels. And so I was nervous. I would have to, I didn't really want to domesticate this cat because they're great hunters. We want them for our neighbors so they can hunt the mice. Wilma has already hunted so many mice for her babies to teach them. In any case, I ended up finding them. The mom had relocated the rest of the kittens into the goat pen, into one of the kidding houses. So I looked around for a while. They were tucked in the back corner. That's why I couldn't find them. And they were so quiet. They were just sleeping that I didn't know where they were. Anyway, I reunited them. They're all happy now. A little bit ironic. There's a TikTok video about the situation, and it is blowing up. It's kind of funny what TikTok decides to do. In any case, if you want to see the kitten in the story, it's on TikTok. I did put it up on YouTube as well if you want to take a look at that. So a little bit funny. But other than that, the kids have been outside all day, every day for the past few days. They're just loving it. I'm loving it. Happy for the warmer weather. And that's it for the homestead update. Excited for the days to come. Looking forward to building things and being out in the warmer weather. In terms of author updates, so Dragon Blooded is still moving along at a very nice clip. I'm very happy with it. I write about 2,000 words per session. So if I can keep that up, then Dragon Blooded first draft could be done in 20 to 25 days of writing sessions. I don't necessarily write on the weekends. Sundays I don't really write. Saturdays I try to. But I'm looking to finish that book here in the next month, or beginning of May, which is exciting. It is a 6-book series, so I'm thinking I'll probably write all 6 of the books. I can write them relatively quickly because I have in my mind what's going to happen. Not really. I mean, my pants are, I don't know for sure by the 6th book. I'm sure I'll figure it out. But I just have in my mind 6 books, 6 different point of views of one of the 6 main characters. So kind of fun, enjoying that process. And that is a YA fantasy series. And I like to say it's a little bit of a combination between like Percy Jackson and the Lorien Legacies. If you've read those books, look them up. They're very good. I've enjoyed those. So enjoying that process. I've mentioned this before, but the first draft of the Kids of Cyber City is done. We finished that a couple of weeks ago, and we're kind of moving to the loosely editing phase, and we've begun writing the 2nd book. So I'm a couple chapters in to the 2nd book, at which point I'll pass it to my co-author, and the progress will just go from there. But the covers are done, and so I'm excited to say you can see the first cover. I posted it on Instagram. I will probably be posting it on YouTube. I need to be a little bit more organized about what I'm doing with my content, but you can see the cover for at least the first book. It is called The Search for Silence. It is a middle grade YA fantasy, or excuse me, YA sci-fi, not YA, if I can get this right. It's a middle grade sci-fi series. So, looking for kind of ages 8 to 12. If you've got anybody in your family, kids or whatnot that are in that range. Lastly, I've been playing around with Midjourney. So I told myself that I would not play with AI, not because of the principle. I'm not against AI. I've been listening to a lot of things about AI. Joanna Penn from the Creative Pen talks very positively about AI. There's a lot of fear around it replacing authors and artists. I don't see that happening. I think it's just a different situation. I don't plan on using ChatGPT, not because I'm scared of it, mainly because I just don't have time to learn another tool. I feel like I'm already way in over my head on tools and systems. I just don't have time for that right now. And my writing process is going okay. I don't feel like I need help getting out of writing slumps or getting out of writer's block or anything. If I get to that point, sure, maybe I'll play around with ChatGPT, but for now, I'm not. In any case, Midjourney is a little bit of a different story. I for a while was thinking I need to try that, but I once again don't have time. It's shockingly easier than I expected it to be. I'm not a prompt master by any degree, and I'm still learning. Some of the pictures that I generate are kind of freaky. I'll just say that. It does exactly what I ask in words, but there's just a lot of weird nuances that it pulls from those words. Still, I finally buckled down. I paid for one of the lower subscriptions, and it's great. I ended up generating at least some of the characters for Dragon Blooded, and they turned out pretty amazing. Will I be using these, making merchandise with them? Most likely not, but in terms of marketing collateral, I may start using it as I get closer to publishing Dragon Blooded. It will be nice to actually have some art. You see those Instagram profiles where everything is beautiful, the aesthetic is just amazing. And I'm not that person. My aesthetic is scrappy. It's just, I'm the casual author after all. But what that means is I'm hoping to take some of this art that I'm created and just use it for marketing, for ads and whatnot, to get people interested in the story as I get closer to publishing. So that's what I'm using it for. I don't plan on selling anything with it, at least not yet. I know some people do, they generate and sell with their AI. Great if you want to do that. But for me, it's mostly just marketing collateral. I don't plan on doing book covers. There's no way I'm not that good. And I don't plan on learning prompt skills that well to get to that point. I will continue to commission for my covers and still commission for art when it comes to actual stuff merchandise that I want to sell. I don't know that I'll rely on AI art for that. At least not yet. I know it's still being developed, but there you go. In any case, I believe that's it for author updates. Just plugging along, looking forward to getting these books done so you have more content to enjoy from me. But I believe that is everything. So we'll go ahead and shift over to the interview portion of the podcast with H. Hi, H. How are you?
Good. How about you?
Doing pretty well. I'm really intrigued and excited to chat with you today about the topic. We'll get into that in just a minute. Before we do, how long have you been writing and publishing?
I've been writing since I was 15 in high school. I took a slight hiatus for college, and then started writing my first novel that I published. So I published From Men and Angels in 2019, December 3rd, 2019. So that was my first published book. And then To Ash and Dust followed a year and a half later. So
That's awesome. I always like to hear when people say they've been writing since they were younger, because I am not one of those people. I'm one of those people that always wanted to write when I was younger, but I never did for various reasons. But this isn't about me. This is about you. So you self-publish, correct? You're an indie publisher,
correct.
and you write fantasy. Is that correct?
I write sci-fi fantasy.
Sci-fi fantasy.
My first trilogy is strictly high fantasy.
Okay.
But I plan many more series and standalone books that will fall under different categories in the sci-fi fantasy genre. So
Okay. Awesome. And so you're still working on completing this trilogy, it sounds like. You've written the first couple
correct.
books and the third
Correct.
one's
Yes. I've finished the first two books, and I'm midway through draft two of book three. So it'll hopefully only require two drafts, beta readers, and then editing. So
awesome. All the fun process. There's
yes.
so many steps, all the various steps to come, writing. I tell people, for me all the time, writing the book isn't the problem. It's all the stuff after that's just like overwhelm.
Yes.
Like all these extra steps and the editing and the more editing and the more editing and then the cover design, and just like I can write stories.
Yes.
That's not the problem.
Yes.
But
I definitely think the first draft, the full creation, full creation mode is my favorite part. And then comes everything else.
everything else, we can just coin it as that. But
Yes.
it's important stuff. I'm not downplaying any of it. I just recognize my own faults and challenges, and that is
Sure.
them.
Sure.
Things. But you have a unique situation, because writing in general is challenging. A lot of people, various parts of the process are challenging for some people, or easier for other people. But in your case, you have some unique challenges that, I guarantee you're not the only author who's experiencing this. You have a passion for writing, you love writing, but you also have some potential challenges to that writing, namely dyslexia and dysgraphia. So before we get into that, let's talk a little about, for people who are listening, they may have heard the words, maybe they don't know what that means. So from your perspective, how would you describe, let's start with dyslexia and then dysgraphia.
Yeah. So Originally it was all under one name, dyslexia, and somewhere along the way they split it out into three different categories, and
Okay.
I ended up having two of them. So dyslexia and dysgraphia are a generally a visual impairment, but it's
Mhm.
underlying it's a part of your brain that didn't develop um, quite as well as other people. Some people have a lot worse symptoms than I do with dyslexia. However, for me, um, words tend to kind of move around on the page, which makes it somewhat hard to read and write, as you can imagine. Um, and again, for me, it's kind of more of a shaking of the words. So the words will kind of shake on the page and I'll lose my place. And have to find it again, so it slows me down in my reading and have to reread several things, several times over the same page. Um, so there's some of that, and then obviously the swapping of letters, the misspelling, those things are very hard in some ways to catch because I'll swap, letters and read it totally fine. I have no problems reading it, but it's obviously wrong. So luckily there's programs out there to help me with that now. But way back when I was in high school, um, it was just kind of me and the page. So it was a lot harder to catch those mistakes and find those things. And of course, back then it wasn't identified as a disability.
Mhm.
So luckily, my mom is also dyslexic, and so she was able to help me through things along the way and help me learn to cope with it and how to cope with it um, and kind of learn along the way. Um, but because of that, when I was writing in high school, I never expected to be a published author.
Mm.
It was always a dream. It was always a want and a kind of a hope. But I just assumed that was never going to happen since I had this disability. Um, and I've heard a lot of other writers and authors with dyslexia have a similar kind of similar story, depending on when they grew up and where they grew up. Um, and whether or not it was a disability, considered a disability by the state that they were in.
Mm.
So that's why I quit writing in college and just focused on my career and my learning for that career and things like that, and just assumed that that would be something that I had done in high school and probably never do again.
Hmm.
So luckily, I had a professor, English professor, who saw my potential. With I did have a high vocabulary at the time. I did have apparently a very good sentence structure that my mom kind of drilled into me, those kinds of things. But he noticed that I was dyslexic and just kind of helped me work through a little bit more, work through some of that kind of stuff and how to help with that, such as spacing on the page. Extra space helps me find my place a lot quicker if things do move. Um, I don't quite lose the place on the page as badly, and things like that. So he really helped me and kind of believed in me that I could actually get through English 1 and 2 in college with an A instead of a C.
Mhm.
And I did actually make it through that, and it kind of gave me hope that I could actually do this kind of writing thing. And so after I graduated, I started writing for Men and Angels.
I mean, it's incredible to hear because I think there's a lot of people who maybe don't understand what's happening with them. So I'm not dyslexic, my wife isn't, but we have a son that is, and we
Mhm.
homeschool. And so we're finding ourselves learning as much as we can about it just so that we can help him. And he's a really bright kid. He's a really fast learner. There's just some interesting challenges that we didn't account for,
Sure.
right? Because we're not as familiar with dyslexia. But there's solutions. There are things that may work for some people that might not work for others. But I think the thing that can be said is there are solutions, right?
Yes.
You're writing. I mean, you're doing it. You have published 2 books now. You have another work in progress. You're working on various other projects, it sounds like. And so, there's a tendency for some people to think, oh, this is too challenging. Maybe this isn't right for me. But if it's something you're passionate about, there's always a way.
Yes, absolutely. And I would 100% tell anybody that's struggling with dyslexia that you can do what you want. Like you can absolutely write if that's what you want. You can read, you know, so many books a year if that's what you want to do.
Hmm.
You may not ever get to the point where you have people, that speed read. My wife is a speed reader, and I absolutely hate that she can do that and I can't. 100% great for her. She's reading 400-page books in days, which
Hmm.
takes me months.
Hmm.
And so, or at least weeks. But so she'll finish off a 500-page book in 3 days and be like, all right, what's next? And I'm like, I wish I could do that kind of thing. I
Hmm.
really do. Um, but to my point is you may not get to that point where you can read that fast, you can write that fast, you can do that kind of thing that quickly, but you can 100% do those things well. Um, I never thought that either of my books would end up being award winning. And both of them have won an award. Book one was an Amazon bestseller. So I point these things out because I'm not only able to write with this disability, I'm able to actually thrive with this disability.
Hmm.
Um, and I 100% believe that anybody that has the same disability can do the same things. Um, so, anybody that's listening that has something like this, some um, print challenges, you can 100% get through it. You can find ways to help yourself do these things, and you can thrive doing it.
And it's always encouraging to hear that. And it's not just your words, but it's also your experience. Like you mentioned, your books have won awards. They've done very well. And I think there's this unfortunate stigma with writing and reading in general that speed is success, which isn't always true. Can it be? Perhaps, right? I think there's something to be said about being able to produce things quickly. I'm not a fast producer myself either. So, not for disability reasons, just time reasons. There's a lot going on in my life, but it doesn't mean that one can't be successful if they can't produce as fast as, say, Brandon Sanderson, right? Or if
Yeah.
some of these other prolific writers, you can still be successful. And of course, success is relative. But, some things that, I want to learn a little bit more about your process, kind of what other considerations do you need to make when it comes to the actual writing? Talked a little bit about spacing between the words. Do you write by hand? Do you write on a computer? I mean, what works for you when it comes to actually producing the content?
I'm an IT guy by trade, so I 100% do everything on the computer.
Yeah, yeah.
I would love to say that I'm the kind of person that sits down with a notebook and writes everything out and does everything by hand. I think that would be so cool. Unfortunately, with my disability, there is no way that I would ever be able to write a full book on paper in 10 years. I mean, it would just take
Yeah.
way too long to kind of get all that down. Plus, then I'd end up putting it into a computer anyway, just for the spelling and grammar checks. So yes, I 100% do everything on the computer. I use a program called Pro Writing Aid. It is there's a free app that allows so many words into it, but it's not near enough for a book.
Hmm.
So I do pay for it. But if you've heard of Grammarly, I tell people it's like Grammarly on crack. Um,
Yes.
So it does everything that Grammarly does with the spelling and the um, grammar mistakes and things like that. But then it also teaches you your pacing. It teaches you your what they call sticky sticky writing or sticky sentences, to
Mm,
where you have too many words in your sentence and you need to cut down on certain words to make it more readable.
mm-hmm.
It helps you with repeated words. One of the biggest hits that I got on my first book was someone told me, they're like, well, the author seems to, in a review, the author seems to pick a word and then beat that word to death, and then pick another word in a few more sentences and proceed to beat that word to death. And I'm like, okay, so I'm repeating too many things and too many words within these paragraphs. And so it actually helps you with that kind of stuff too. So it's not only helping you with your grammar and spelling, but it's also teaching you some of the craft of writing. And I would 100% say it's worth every penny that I spend on it. That being said, that also helps with my dyslexia,
Mm,
because it catches all of my little mistakes, my swapped letters, my swapped words. My sentence structure sometimes comes out a little wonky and a little mixed around because of the dyslexia disability. And so it catches those kinds of things. It's like, you might want to rewrite this sentence.
mm.
It's a little weird. And it's like, okay, all right. So that really helps me there. Um, I do write with a excess spacing on the page.
Okay.
Um,
Sure.
I find that much, much easier. Um, so I ended up writing with basically 2 point spacing between my sentences. And that helps with my, like I said, when I lose my spot on the page because things moved, um, I can kind of snap back to whatever sentence, and hit that sentence and then find my place within that sentence. Versus when I don't have that spacing, sometimes I have to go all the way back to the beginning of the paragraph because I don't know where I was.
Mm-hmm.
It's much harder to find that place again. Um, so there's spacing is a big thing. When I'm reading, not necessarily writing, there are fonts. If I'm reading digitally, there's one called Open Dyslexia.
Oh, interesting.
That one looks kind of crazy. It looks a little bit like almost like Comic Sans.
Interesting.
It's got all the different size letters and different size words. And again, that helps me find my place a lot quicker. Also seems to help just the movement of the words on the page. They don't tend to move as much. So that's really nice. And then when I'm reading print, so I'm reading on a physical book. A lot of times I'll put up a colored, see-through colored sheet on the pages, and that seems to um, help with reading on the book itself. So there are a lot more resources out there now versus when I was in high school, when nobody really understood the disability. So
Hmm.
um,
I was Googling it so that I could look at it, and it's actually it's interesting, because someone who's not dyslexic, I mean, I look at the font and it just looks like a different font. I don't detect a lot of differences to it, but it's cool that there's a font that helps. It's
yeah,
just great that that has been engineered by someone to assist in this situation. So do you type in that font then when you're writing your story? Is that what you're writing in normally?
anything that I can get the open dyslexic font into for words, I do 100%.
Oh, cool.
So, and you can find it online as a downloadable for, Word and that kind of stuff. Kindle has it in there as one of their fonts for reading. Um, I'm not sure if Pro Writing Aid actually has that in there. I need to look that and see if I can add a font to it, but I haven't actually looked for one because well, I think I've just been a little lazy on that. So
Well, I mean, to be fair, there's all sorts of things like that for myself as well. You deal with a challenge or, a configuration, you could fix it. And it's just like, I haven't, we say we don't have time. It's really, we just haven't made the time for it.
correct.
It's just one of those things that's
Correct.
just annoying, but you haven't fixed. Pro writing it. I love pro writing it. I use it as well.
Okay.
I'm a sloppy writer. I'm going to be honest with you. It has nothing to do, like I said, I'm not dyslexic or anything to that degree. I just write like in my sessions. I it flows out pretty well, and I don't even look back. I just write, don't look back until I come back to the next round of editing. And for the most part, I don't say anything super crazy. There have been some pretty hilarious errors that I find that make me laugh still.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, pro writing it is it's amazing. So if you're listening, this is not a sponsored. Pro writing it is not sponsoring this. It's a great product, and I've learned to use it. I use it multiple times throughout my process. After the first draft, and then after a couple rounds of edits, just to catch some extra things. So
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah.
It's very, very helpful. So have you found that do you ever get frustrated? Like, I mean, this is something that you've dealt with your whole life. You found coping mechanisms. Do you find that it's hard to find that motivation to write because of frustration or challenges, or are you just kind of used to it at this point?
In some ways, I'm just kind of used to it. It's just kind of been a part of my life for so long that it's just there. And so it's just one of those things that I almost overlook nowadays.
Nice. Yeah.
In the fact that I don't think of it as a disability. I just
Yeah.
don't do what I want and
Yeah.
and fix things and after the fact. Um, I would definitely say that there have been points in my life where I look at my disability and as a disability.
Sure.
And I have had challenges, especially in school. There was many times where I meant to write a certain answer and I wrote something else, a different word, a different whatever, multiple choice, got the letters mixed up, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think there's been times where I've been very frustrated with it. However, in my adult life, um, I would say that there's been a lot less of it, a lot less
Nice.
frustration, a lot more, just being able to cope with it as just something that's there.
hmm I mean, there's something to be said about this is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but growing up.
Yes,
I mean, so I don't have, I'm not dyslexic or anything. I am colorblind though, which provides it's one of those things that most of the time I don't notice. But as a kid, it was more prevalent. When I was coloring pictures in elementary school, I would color things wrong all the time. And it wasn't a big deal to me, but the other kids around would think it was hilarious and they would make fun of me. And it's not a
sure.
huge deal. Like, it just bothered me more when I was younger, still in school in general. By the time I got to high school, I was really good at faking it.
Mm,
You just learn colors become logic at that point, right? Where it's not necessarily deciphering the color, it's about applying logic to the situation, such as you see a male wearing a t-shirt that is either pink or purple or blue. I'm going to assume that it's not pink or purple and it's probably blue, right? And so I make that guess, and so I could hide it pretty well until I make a mistake and do something, and people are like, wait, what did you just say? Like they're like, where did that come from? So
sure.
the point of this monologue is I think I can understand what you mean by you just kind of learn to cope with it. It just becomes part of your life. You kind of assign these coping mechanisms that essentially kind of hide the problem. So it's not detectable by a lot of other people. And sometimes it's not even detectable to you. You kind of forget, like, oh, that's right. This isn't normal, right?
Yeah.
This is just I'm used to it. So I'm so used to that as just my normal. But that's a good thing. And I think this can be applied to any challenge, right? Whether it be a disability or whether it be, trauma or more emotional conditions or, maybe stress or various things. I think it can be said that there's a time and a place for everything. Maybe you'll still have occasional challenging moments, but you can overcome it. You can come up with those coping mechanisms. And as you learn them, you hold on to them. And then you just do it more and more until you get to a place where it just feels manageable. It feels normal. You don't even really notice it anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And a lot of the coping things that I do for my writing and reading, I just do automatically.
yeah.
Like you said, they've become normal for me. And so I forget that people don't space their sentences as far apart as I do
Oh,
and
yeah,
things like
sure.
that until someone says something about it. Like I was talking with another author here in the area, and he was like, "Your spacing in your novel is, more than normal." And I was like, "Yeah, well, I do that because I'm dyslexic, and it helps people with print challenges, to read it better." And he was like, well, I never thought of that kind of thing. And I was like, well, I didn't even think about it either until you said something, but that's why. It's just something that I it's normal for me. And so I don't even think about it. I just do it.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, and once again, it doesn't matter. I think there's this whole worry that authors might have that, you know, someone might not like it or it'll bother someone. I mean, at the end of the day, you're writing the way you need to write. When it reaches the formatable piece of it, that's a different
Mhm.
story. I mean, that's what formatting's
Sure.
for. Format it,
Yes.
you fix all that later. So it's not a big deal in the moment. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, it is interesting. It just provides an interesting insight to yourself, like, oh, that's right. I didn't even notice I was doing that. It's just is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, which is great. Have you found that it's challenging from the editing perspective? So for both you and for an editor, has there been any barriers or challenges when you get to that point of the writing phase?
I think there was some with the first book.
Okay, sure,
Some of the sentence structure and things like that. I hadn't found Pro Writing Aid for one.
sure, yeah.
And so two, I hadn't kind of perfected the craft of writing. Not that I've perfected it now, but I
I
was
haven't either.
very much a novice on book one. And so I think there was some challenges there. She was, looking at my sentence going, what in the world are you doing with this sentence? And I got lucky that it was my editor is also one of my really old friends
Oh, nice.
from way back in the seventh grade. So we can talk with each other candidly, and she would just be like, "What is going on with this thing? Like, just rewrite this because it's awful, and things like that." So
That's awesome.
so yeah, the ability to have already known her and to have that kind of history with her made things a lot easier, I think. And then as I was getting into book two and eventually into book three, I found more tools to kind of help with that. And I think there's been a lot less of any kind of barriers or any kind of problems between um, me being dyslexic and my editor not.
Hmm.
So
I mean, I think it's interesting to hear that because for some reason I had this idea that I'm imagining phrases being flipped and letters being crisscrossed and everything, but it can't be that much different from myself, who writes pretty sloppily, and I know that about myself. So I mean, there's been often times where I read a sentence and think, "What the heck was I going for with that? That doesn't make any sense to me." And then I just laugh, and I often rewrite the paragraph or whatever to fix it.
sure.
But even more, and I've experienced this, I imagine you possibly have experienced this as well, is the indetectable things where I
Hmm.
glaze over a sentence and for some reason I somehow remember what I meant, even though I
Yep.
hadn't read this phrase for like weeks or months. And then it still gets to the editor. It's just like, how did this possibly get past you? I'm like, I don't know. Because I've read this 3 or 4 times, and still that sentence makes sense to me. But then
Sure.
you like I read it slowly. I'm like, okay, yeah, that doesn't actually make sense, does it? It's just funny how our brains work. They kind of fill in the gaps where the brain solves the problems that a reader won't
Yes.
solve.
Right. Because they don't know what you're actually trying to say there. It's all
Yep.
new to them, even though, and for you, you've been through it six, seven, 8 times, and read through it that many times. And you're like, no, it makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you're talking about. I think that's where beta readers and ARC readers
Mm-hmm.
are your lifesaver for that kind of thing. I mean, because even some of the things that I've done some of the mistakes that I've made in my writing make it through editing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, how did that make it through? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so having a few more eyes on it, a few more sets of eyes on it definitely helps with those kinds of things. But yes, I will say that there has been many a time where I've read a sentence 100% completely correct and send it off to somebody and they're like, what are you, what are you even trying to say here? Like the words in this sentence make no sense in the order that you put it in. And I'm like, okay, well, let me reread that and see if I can figure out
Adjust it.
what where I'm supposed to have all these words.
Well, I think it's something to be said, and this is, I think it probably could be a pitfall if it went to the extreme, but I think overall it's a good thing when an author can let go of those worries, right?
Hmm.
Because as authors, regardless of your situation, your challenges, potential disabilities, I think there's a lot of times where we just have this fear of writing because we're afraid that it's going to be bad or that someone's going to read it and be like, oh, that's a mess or that's ugly writing or whatever. But it sounds like you've reached this place where it's not a worry. It's like, honestly, I'm not worried about it. It's just, I'm writing and it is what it is. And some people like it, others might not. Do you feel like you've reached that point for the most part?
I think for the most part, I mean, there's obviously always that want to have people like it and
Sure,
have
of
people read
course.
it and enjoy it. But for the most part, I've gotten to especially with my beta readers, who most of them I know as friends now, not just beta readers and my editor and things like that. I have no problem sending them my manuscript as incomplete as it, is when they get to that point and having them kind of pick apart my whole, um, my chapters, my sentences, my words, all of that, and just kind of come back at me completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I think at the beginning of the whole writing process, that kind of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
They come back completely honest, which is what I really want them because that's the only thing that's going to help me. That's what I really want them to do. And it's like, ow, that this is
Mm-hmm.
my baby. This is the thing that I've spent years on already, and have them come at me over one sentence, and I'm like, ooh, ow, that really hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Versus now, I've kind of gotten a callus per se to those kinds of things, and I feel like that's not as big of a deal. I think it's worse if, and there's always those things, but if it makes it all the way past beta readers, past editing, past my proofreader, all the way to publishing, and then it's found by like one of my friends or my parent or some well-meaning person on social media coming at me and be like, hey, on page 47 in paragraph 6, you totally have a plot hole here. It's like, oh, that's the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And that still kind of hurts. But as far as beta readers and editors and whatnot, yeah, I don't have any problem with them coming at me and going, this is a hot mess and you need to fix this. So
I like to call it a hardened resolve because you're gonna do it anyway, regardless of what feedback you get. I mean, there's always still that twinge of, oh, that's terrible, the kind of
right.
embarrassment piece of it that you can just kind of forget about and overlook. The thing about publishing, and this is, I think, another consideration that people need to have for when they're writing is it will never be perfect, and that's okay. And that's okay. It's totally
Absolutely
fine.
right.
Now, the thing is, some people are bothered by something like typos or plot holes. I don't care that much. I mean,
Yeah.
when I'm reading a book, I've read plenty of traditional and indie published books with mistakes, and I don't care. Sometimes I chuckle because the mistakes are a little bit funny. But like for me, it doesn't ruin the story. I don't really care unless it is distracting. And for the most
Sure.
part, like I can think of maybe two books since I've been reading my whole life that were too distracting. That I was like,
Hmm.
I don't know if I can read this book. But I never thought about it as a reflection on the author as much as just need a little bit more polishing. As long as I'm entertained by the story, I don't care. And I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people out there that are like that. However, that doesn't mean be lazy, right? I mean, obviously, edit your work, do the best you can to make it perfect, but don't stress. I think there's so many
Yeah.
people that are afraid to hit publish because they're like, what if there's mistakes? What if there's mistakes?
Yeah,
publish it.
no,
I
I think
mean,
that's
fine.
I think that's absolutely true. I was at a convention, just sitting with another author selling her books or whatever, and a gal walked up to me and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm a writer too. I write." And she told me the genre and how many books she had written and things like that. And I was like, "Oh, that's really awesome. Where can I find your books?" And she's like, "Oh, none of them are published." And I was, yeah, it blew my mind. I was like,
Mind blown.
"You've written 18 books, 18 of them, and none of them are published." And I think a lot of people are that way. I think a lot of people
Mhm.
have stories, and a lot of people have even written those stories down and are have complete books, maybe that need polishing or editing, but can't hit that publish because it's never perfect.
Mhm.
And you're absolutely right. It will never be perfect. There are mistakes in book one and book two for mine
Mhm.
that I'll probably never go back and change.
It's kind of a time thing. I look at it and I think,
Sure.
is it worth
Yes.
trying to go through and update everything? No. Like
Exactly.
it's one
Exactly.
letter. I'm just gonna leave it.
They're minor enough that it's like, yeah, it's probably fine. They can understand what I'm trying to say through this sentence, even though it has a typo in
Hmm.
it, and so it's not worth going back and changing and spending all that extra time combing through my book again just for more problems to crop up after I publish that edition.
Hmm.
you know I absolutely think there are big things that you should watch for and things that should be edited out, obviously. But there's a lot of those small things that it's like, is it really worth the time and effort of completing finding every little, jot and tittle that's wrong.
Hmm.
Um, so I think I strive more for a 95% than 100. So in a
I
lot of
mean,
my,
strive for 100, but recognize you probably won't get there. That's my
yeah,
outlook on it. Just like, I mean, I'm
sure.
doing what I can, and I just there's no space in my brain to worry about stuff like that. That's what I tell myself. So I'm also, and I don't know if it's not, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but I don't like to waste content. I'm
Hmm,
always baffled by people. It's been said that certain authors, I won't name them, wrote, very successful authors, didn't publish their first book until after they had written like 10. And to me,
sure.
that's baffling, right?
Yeah,
Because it just for me feels like wasted opportunity. I mean, people think, or maybe they say, I need to write out the bad stuff, to get out the bad stuff. Okay, I mean that's fine, if that's your prerogative. I to date have not written anything that has not been published, or I don't plan on publishing,
sure.
because I mean it's a story. Like I get that it's ugly. Maybe it was ugly when you first started writing it 10 years ago, but it's probably worth looking at. I mean, it
Yeah,
was an idea then. It could be a good idea now. Tweak it, solve it, publish it. It just seems like a wasted opportunity to have fully completed works or ideas just sitting there for eternity. Just
I have
fix them.
on that. Sorry. On that note, I do have a story that I have written. I wrote it in high school. It was somewhere around 300 pages of content.
Wow.
It was a Red Dawn type scenario,
Okay. Yeah.
that kind of idea of the story. And looking back at it, I still have it. I still have the files. I still actually have a physical copy of it. And it's awful. I mean, it is just the worst
Yeah.
thing that I've written. So, one, looking back at that, I can definitely see how far I've come, and that's really nice to see. Um, but two, I do have thoughts about going back, rewriting it, polishing it up, and one day actually publishing it, because I have the same kind of feeling. I hate wasting that, because that was, a couple years of work
Mhm.
um in high school that I wrote, a good portion of that story. So
It's perspective, right? Some people may think it's not worth it. Obviously, if people don't feel comfortable publishing anything, no pressure. You do
yeah,
you. But for
yeah,
me, I'm the kind of person that couldn't let it fester. be like, I want to fix it. I want to just get it to a place where I feel comfortable publishing. Otherwise, it's just wasted time.
Yeah,
So for me, and once again, I'm not saying you're wasting your time. Don't take it the wrong way. People
sure.
listen. It's just this is the way my brain operates. So,
Yeah,
but I think it's great to hear your perspective, your understanding for your own personal situation. Potentially, people are experiencing similar things, or completely different, right? Disabilities or just challenges in general. But I think come at it with an air of positivity. I think that is in the end what will aid you the most, more than anything, is
absolutely.
recognizing that yes, these problems are real, these challenges are real, and they're not being discounted. However, they don't need to be an excuse. They don't need to be the blocker for your dreams, such as
Absolutely.
in this case publishing. And you are a perfect case of that.
I don't think I'm a perfect anything, but
Well, I mean, to be fair, no one is. But I mean, in this instance, a very
yes,
inspiring situation in case. We'll call it that.
thank you.
But yeah, this has been excellent. I appreciate your perspective on this and the time. We're running out of time though, so I just want to make sure that before we go, you can let people know where can they find more information about you and your books if they want to check them out.
Yeah, so my website is probably the best place to go. It's hlwalshbooks.com. That has links to both my books and wherever you can find them, which is everywhere you can find a book. And then it also has things like extra maps,
Awesome.
extra content. There's a If you sign up for my newsletter, there's extra free stories.
Awesome.
I have a few short stories that I've written that are given out for free if you just have to sign up for my newsletter. And then if you do sign up for my newsletter, you have all the updates every month, and all the things that I'm working on. Sometimes I even poll my audience to see if I can get names for certain things, so
Oh, cool.
you can even find some of that in my books. Different names of places and things that people have voted on. So
How cool.
yeah.
I love it. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. And if you want to potentially see polls, make some decisions about H's books, then jump on that boat right there. Thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know I found it very enlightening and helpful and encouraging, for my dyslexic son. But if you have any of these challenges with your writing, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's a lot of stress or ADHD or whatever it is you might be struggling with, it doesn't mean that you can't still write and be a successful author. H has already shown that, so take encouragement from that. Next week, we'll be talking to Alex Freeman, who is a prolific audiobook producer, about how to write an effective book for an audiobook. It's one of those things that you don't think about when you're writing your book. A lot of authors don't think, how can I write this book so that it would make a good audiobook? But it's something to keep in mind, because every book should become an audiobook in terms of accessibility and to reach a lot more audiences. So it's a great conversation. I think you'll enjoy that, but tune in next week. Of course, if you want to join my podcast, head over to dankenner.com, fill out the survey there, and I can get you on. Or if you have any author friends or anybody who's looking for an opportunity, definitely send them my way. I'd love to have a conversation with them. Thanks so much. Talk to you next week.